The brake lights of our SUV disappeared around the corner, taking with them my husband of 8 years and his college buddies who thought abandoning me in Cedar Falls, Montana was the perfect punchline to our weekend getaway gone wrong. I stood frozen on Main Street, my mouth still open from the argument we had been having outside Murphy's Diner, watching the dust settle on the empty road ahead. "They'll come back," I whispered to myself, drawing stares from locals enjoying their Saturday evening on weathered wooden benches. But as minutes stretched into an hour and the mountain air grew colder, the knot in my stomach tightened with a terrible certainty. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Before I continue, I want to thank everyone who has been following these stories of resilience. If you believe that sometimes our darkest moments become the doorways to our brightest futures, consider subscribing. It's free and helps support more stories of women who discovered their strength when everything fell apart. Now, let me tell you how one abandoned wife turned a cruel joke into the beginning of her liberation. The argument had started innocently enough. We were supposed to be celebrating Derek's promotion at his accounting firm with a guys' weekend that somehow I'd been invited to join at the last minute. His friends, Brad, Kevin, and Marcus, had been drinking heavily since we arrived at the cabin Friday night, and by Saturday afternoon, their behavior had escalated beyond obnoxious college nostalgia into something darker. When Kevin made his third inappropriate comment about the waitress at Murphy's Diner, I had quietly suggested we head back to our rental cabin. The response was immediate and humiliating. "Sarah always has to be the fun police," Brad had slurred, ordering another round of beers despite the fact it was barely 3 o'clock. "Some women just can't handle when men want to blow off steam," Marcus added, his words deliberately loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. Derek, who should have defended me, instead chose that moment to slide deeper into his role as one of the guys. When I stood up to leave, he followed me outside, but not to apologize. "You're embarrassing me in there," he hissed, his breath reeking of alcohol and something meaner. "Can't you just relax for one weekend without turning into my mother?" Years of accumulated resentment bubbled to the surface. I told him exactly what I thought of his friends, his behavior, and his complete lack of respect for me. The argument escalated quickly, with harsh truths being thrown like weapons on both sides. "Fine," he had said, climbing into the driver's seat while his friends piled into the SUV, all of them laughing at some joke I wasn't part of. "You want to act like you don't need us? Figure out how to get home yourself. You're always telling me how independent and capable you are." The slam of the door and the roar of the engine had punctuated his words, and then they were gone. Standing alone on Main Street, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. 17 missed calls to Derek went straight to voicemail. Text messages showed as delivered but remained unanswered. In growing panic, I tried Brad, then Kevin, then Marcus. Each number was blocked. This wasn't a momentary impulse of anger. This was planned humiliation, and the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I counted my cash, $83 and my debit card. Derek had insisted on handling all our trip expenses, keeping my credit card safe in his wallet back at the cabin. My purse held my driver's license, some lip balm, and the crushing weight of my new reality. Cedar Falls, Montana, population 1,247 according to the faded welcome sign, consisted of one main street lined with a few shops, Murphy's Diner, a single gas station, and what appeared to be a motel with a flickering vacancy sign. The nearest major city was 4 hours away by car, a car I no longer had. The desk clerk at the Pine Ridge Motel, a weathered woman in her 60s named Dolores, looked at me with kind but knowing eyes as I requested their cheapest room. "Honey, you okay?" she asked, sliding a key across the worn Formica counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I managed, accepting the key to room 7. The room was small but clean, with wood paneling that probably hadn't been updated since the 1970s and a bed covered by a quilt that looked handmade. I sat on the edge of that bed and finally let the tears come, my phone clutched in my hand as I called Derek over and over, each attempt met with the cold efficiency of his voicemail. By Sunday morning, I had convinced myself this nightmare would end. Derek would return, sheepish and apologetic, and we would have a difficult but necessary conversation about boundaries and respect. I would be angry, but ultimately relieved to be rescued from this impossible situation. He didn't come. By Sunday evening, as I sat in Murphy's Diner nursing my second coffee and making a single piece of apple pie last 2 hours, the reality of my situation began to sink in. My phone battery was dying, I had no charger, and my cash was dwindling fast. Tom Murphy, the owner of the diner, had been watching me with increasing concern. A man in his 50s with graying temples and kind eyes, he finally approached my corner booth. "Miss, I don't mean to pry, but you've been here most of the day. Everything all right?" The story spilled out of me in broken fragments. The fight, the abandonment, my dwindling resources. Tom listened without judgment, occasionally nodding and refilling my coffee cup. "Well," he said when I finished, "seems to me you've got two choices. You can sit here feeling sorry for yourself, or you can figure out what comes next. Either way, you look like you could use a meal that isn't just pie." He returned with a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, comfort food that reminded me of my grandmother's cooking. When I protested that I couldn't afford it, he waved me off. "Consider it an investment," he said. "You're going to need your strength." As I ate, Tom shared that he had purchased the diner 3 years ago after his wife passed away, needing something to keep his hands and mind busy in retirement. His daughter lived in Seattle, his son in Denver. Cedar Falls had become his refuge, but he understood the feeling of starting over in an unfamiliar place. "You know," he said, refilling my coffee again, "I've been looking for someone to help with the breakfast and lunch shifts. The pay isn't much, but it includes meals, and I could probably work something out with Dolores about extended stay rates at the motel. If you're interested." The offer stunned me. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're polite to servers, you clean up after yourself, and you're dealing with a difficult situation with dignity. That's more than I can say for half the people who come through here." The next morning, I stood behind the counter at Murphy's Diner wearing a borrowed apron, learning the rhythm of small-town breakfast service. The learning curve was steep. I'd worked in marketing for a tech company in Denver before Derek and I married, and my kitchen skills had never extended beyond heating up frozen meals after long days at the office. Tom proved to be a patient teacher, showing me how to crack eggs without breaking the yolks, how to know when bacon was perfectly crisp, and the secret to his famous hash browns, a little bit of onion powder and a cast iron skillet seasoned by decades of use. The customers were curious, but kind. Word had spread through the small town that Tom had hired the abandoned wife from Denver. And while the attention made me uncomfortable initially, I soon realized their interest came from genuine concern rather than gossip. Marge Henderson, who came in every morning for coffee and wheat toast, brought me a phone charger that fit my device. "Had an extra one," she claimed, though I suspected she had made a special trip to buy it. Bill Owens, who owned the hardware store, offered me his employee discount on anything I might need to get settled. When I protested that I wasn't planning to stay permanently, he just smiled and said, "We'll see." The work was physically demanding in ways my office job had never been. My feet ached from standing all day, my hands developed small burns from the grill, and I fell into bed each night exhausted. But there was something deeply satisfying about the tangible results of my labor. Plates of food that nourished people, clean tables ready for the next customer, the register balanced at the end of each day. More importantly, I was earning money that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in years, I wasn't depending on Derek's salary or asking permission to make purchases. The independence was intoxicating. As weeks turned into a month, I began to truly see Cedar Falls beyond its initial impression of a tiny, isolated town. The community had depth and character that my hurried weekend visit had missed entirely. The library, run by a retired English teacher named Helen Price, became my evening refuge. Helen had stocked the small building with an impressive collection, and she was always eager to recommend books that might interest me. Through our conversations, I learned that she had moved to Cedar Falls 30 years ago to care for her aging parents and simply never left. Sometimes the places we end up accidentally become the places we were meant to be all along, she observed one evening as she locked up behind us. The hardware store where Bill worked doubled as the town's unofficial community center. Farmers gathered there in the early morning to discuss weather and crop prices, teenagers congregated after school to avoid going home, and anyone with a problem they couldn't solve alone eventually found their way to Bill's practical wisdom. Dr. Emily Rodriguez ran the town's small medical clinic with the help of one nurse practitioner. She had graduated from medical school with dreams of working in emergency medicine in a major city, but fell in love with Cedar Falls during her rural medicine rotation. 10 years later, she had no regrets about choosing a practice where she knew every patient by name. Even the Pine Ridge Motel revealed hidden depths. Dolores had been running it for 25 years, and her attention to detail showed in ways that hadn't been apparent during my first desperate night. The rooms were spotless. The coffee in the lobby was always fresh, and she had an uncanny ability to sense when guests needed company versus solitude. 6 weeks after being abandoned, my phone rang during the dinner rush at Murphy's Diner. Derek's name appeared on the screen, and my hands shook so violently that I nearly dropped the device. "Sarah?" His voice was tight with controlled anger. "This has gone far enough. It's time to come home." I stepped into the kitchen where Tom was finishing an order of chicken fried steak, my heart hammering against my ribs. After weeks of silence, hearing Derek's voice felt surreal. "Where are you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "I'm at the office, trying to salvage what's left of my reputation after my wife disappeared for over a month without explanation. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Jennifer from HR has been asking questions, my boss wants to know why I seem distracted, and your sister has called me 6 times. The familiar pattern of making everything about him, even my abandonment, sparked anger instead of the guilt he was clearly trying to provoke. "My disappearance?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Derek, you left me stranded in a town 4 hours from home with $83 and no way to get back. That's not disappearing, that's surviving abandonment." "Oh, come on, Sarah. It was a joke that went too far. We figured you'd call your sister or take a bus home and we'd deal with it when we got back. We never thought you'd just vanish completely." Tom looked up from his cooking, concern evident in his expression. I realized I was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles had turned white. "A joke?" I laughed bitterly. "Abandoning your spouse in an unfamiliar place is your idea of humor? Look, I'm sorry, okay? I apologize. The guys were drunk. I was drunk. It was stupid. But this tantrum of yours has made its point. Time to be an adult and come home so we can work this out." The condescension in his tone, the same tone he had used throughout our marriage whenever I expressed feelings he found inconvenient, crystallized something inside me. I am being an adult, Derek. I'm supporting myself. I'm contributing to a community, and I'm making decisions about my own life. For the first time in years, I'm not walking on eggshells around your moods or asking permission to have opinions. Supporting yourself? His laugh was harsh. "Sarah, you're working as a waitress in some backwater town, living in a motel. This isn't independence, it's delusion. This backwater town has shown me more respect and kindness in 6 weeks than you did in the last 3 years of our marriage." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Derek spoke again, his voice had shifted to the calculating tone I recognized from his business negotiations. "Fine. If you want to play hardball, let's talk facts. The house, the cars, the investments, they're all in my name. You walk away from this marriage, you walk away with nothing. Is your pride really worth starting over at 32 with no assets and no career prospects?" The threat that might have terrified me 2 months ago now felt like just another manipulation tactic from a man who had never truly seen me as an equal partner. "Derek," I said quietly, "I already started over. And you know what I discovered? I'm capable of far more than you ever gave me credit for." I hung up the phone before he could respond. Tom had pretended to focus on his cooking during my conversation, but when I returned to the dining room, he was waiting with a cup of coffee and a knowing look. "That sounded like a difficult call," he observed. "My husband wants me to come home. And what do you want?" The question stopped me cold. For 8 years of marriage, I had focused on what Derek wanted, what would make him happy, what would avoid conflict. The concept of prioritizing my own desires felt foreign and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I want to stay," I said, the words surprising me with their certainty. "I want to stay here." Tom's smile was gentle but unsurprised. "Well then, I guess we should talk about making this arrangement more permanent." Over the next hour, as the dinner crowd thinned and evening settled over Cedar Falls, Tom and I discussed the future. The diner's previous owner had lived in the small apartment above the restaurant, but Tom had never used the space, preferring his house on the edge of town. He offered to rent it to me at a rate that would be manageable on my salary, with the option to gradually take on more responsibility in the business. "I'm not getting any younger," he admitted, "and running this place alone is harder than it used to be. If you're serious about staying, I'd like to train you to eventually become a partner. Someone who understands both the business side and the community side of what makes a place like this work." The apartment was small but charming, with slanted ceilings and windows that overlooked Main Street. Someone had painted the walls a cheerful yellow, and the previous tenant had left behind a few pieces of furniture: a kitchen table, a reading chair, a dresser that had seen better days but still functioned perfectly. Standing in what could be my first real home as an independent adult, I felt a sense of possibility that had been missing from my life for longer than I cared to admit. 3 months after Derek's phone call, divorce papers arrived via certified mail. He had filed for dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting an equitable division of assets. His lawyer's letter made it clear that Derek expected me to return to Denver for mediation and settlement discussions. Instead, I contacted a family law attorney in the nearest major city, using money I had carefully saved from my wages at the diner. Jessica Martinez was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in helping people navigate divorces where one spouse had significantly more financial resources than the other. Montana is an equitable distribution state, she explained during our first meeting. That doesn't mean 50-50, but it does mean the court considers both parties' contributions to the marriage, including non-financial contributions. The fact that you supported his career by managing the household and social obligations has value. The legal process was complex and emotionally draining, but Jessica proved to be a fierce advocate. She helped me document not just my financial contributions during our marriage, but also the professional sacrifices I had made to support Derek's advancement and the years of unpaid labor that had enabled his success. Derek's initial offer was insulting: a small cash settlement and my personal belongings. Jessica's counterproposal demanded half the equity in our Denver home, a portion of his retirement accounts, and temporary alimony to help me establish financial independence. While the lawyers negotiated, my life in Cedar Falls continued to evolve and deepen. Tom had officially made me assistant manager of the diner, with a salary increase that reflected my growing responsibilities. I had learned to create staff schedules, manage inventory, and handle the bookkeeping that kept the business running smoothly. More importantly, I had found my place in the community in ways that went beyond my role at Murphy's Diner. When the town council needed someone to organize the annual Harvest Festival, Helen Price recommended me. The event had been struggling in recent years, and my marketing background proved valuable in developing promotional strategies and coordinating with local businesses. The festival was a success, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and generating revenue for local merchants. Bill Owens joked that I had single-handedly saved Cedar Falls from economic extinction, which was an exaggeration, but the pride in his voice was real. Dr. Rodriguez recruited me to help with a community health fair, recognizing that my organizational skills could benefit the town beyond the restaurant business. Marge Henderson asked me to join the library board, insisting that fresh perspectives were exactly what the organization needed. Each new role, each deepening connection, wove me more firmly into the fabric of Cedar Falls. What had started as a refuge from abandonment had become a genuine home. Nearly 8 months after being left on Main Street, Derek appeared at Murphy's Diner on a Tuesday morning. I was refilling coffee for the early crowd when I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, surveying the modest restaurant with obvious disdain. He looked exactly the same. Expensive casual clothes, perfectly styled hair, the confident posture of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. But something about him seemed diminished, as if the familiar packaging contained less substance than I remembered. "Sarah," he said, approaching the counter with the smile he used for difficult clients. "You look different." I was different. 8 months of physical work had changed my body, giving me strength and endurance I'd never possessed. 8 months of independence had changed my posture, my confidence, the way I moved through the world. 8 months of genuine community had changed my understanding of what relationships could be when built on mutual respect and shared values. "Derek, what are you doing here?" "I was in the area for business," he lied smoothly. "Thought we should finally have a face-to-face conversation about our situation." Tom emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Though I hadn't told him about Derek's appearance, he seemed to sense the tension immediately. "Everything okay out here, Sarah?" "This is my husband," I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue. "Derek, this is Tom Murphy. He owns the diner." Derek extended his hand with practiced charm. "Derek Phillips. Thank you for looking after my wife during her sabbatical." Tom's handshake was brief and his smile polite but cool. "Sarah's been a blessing to this community. We're grateful she chose to stay." The emphasis on chose wasn't lost on Derek, whose charm faltered slightly. "Yes, well, we need to discuss her return to Denver. Perhaps we could have some privacy?" I glanced around the diner, where several regular customers were pretending to focus on their breakfasts while obviously listening to our conversation. These people had become my friends, my support system, my chosen family. I had nothing to hide from them. Whatever you need to say, you can say it here. Derek's jaw tightened with frustration. Sarah, be reasonable. We can't discuss our personal business in front of strangers. They're not strangers. They're my community. The word seemed to genuinely confuse him. Your community is in Denver. Your life is in Denver. This is just some kind of extended vacation from reality. My reality is here now, Derek. I have a job I love, people who value me, responsibilities I take seriously. I have a life I built with my own hands and my own choices. His expression shifted to the condescending patience I remembered from countless previous arguments. Look around, Sarah. This is a diner in the middle of nowhere. You're serving coffee to farmers and truckers for minimum wage when you could be living in a beautiful home, traveling, having the kind of life most women dream about. Most women don't dream about being controlled and diminished by their partners, I replied evenly. Most women dream about being respected and valued for who they are, not what they can provide. Derek glanced around the restaurant, clearly uncomfortable with our public audience. Fine. You want to have this conversation here? Let's be honest about what this is really about. You're angry about Italy, and you've made your point. I've learned my lesson about drinking too much with the guys. Can we move past this now? The complete failure to understand what had really happened, what was still happening, crystallized everything I had discovered about myself and our marriage over the past 8 months. Derek, this isn't about Italy. Italy was just the catalyst. This is about the fact that you thought abandoning me was an appropriate response to disagreement. This is about the fact that it took you 6 weeks to even call to see if I was alive. This is about the fact that you controlled every aspect of our marriage while telling yourself you were being protective. I took a deep breath, aware that every person in the diner was listening, but no longer caring. This is about the fact that you still don't see me as a full person with legitimate desires and opinions. You see me as an accessory to your life, and when that accessory became inconvenient, you discarded it. Well, I'm not an accessory anymore. I'm not your wife anymore, and I'm never going back to being small enough to fit into the box you built for me. Derek stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, disbelief, and something that might have been hurt. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, he said finally. Maybe, I agreed, but it's my mistake to make, and that makes all the difference. Without another word, Derek turned and walked out of Murphy's Diner. Through the front window, I watched him climb into his rental car and drive out of Cedar Falls, out of my new life, for the final time. The silence in the restaurant stretched for several beats before Bill Owens started to applaud. Within seconds, the entire room had joined him, and I found myself surrounded by the warmth of people who had watched me grow from a stranded victim into someone capable of standing up for herself. Today marks exactly 1 year since Derek drove away and left me standing alone on Main Street. I'm writing this from the small office above Murphy's Diner, where I'm reviewing applications from people interested in joining our staff for the summer tourist season. Yes, our staff. 6 months ago, Tom made me a full partner in the business. The paperwork is official, the bank account is in both our names, and the decisions about menu changes and operating hours are made together. He claims I've brought new energy and ideas that have revitalized the restaurant. But I know the truth is simpler. I've brought the enthusiasm of someone who finally found work that feels meaningful. The divorce was finalized 4 months ago. Derek's lawyer eventually negotiated a settlement that, while not generous, provided enough money for me to make a down payment on a small house 3 blocks from Main Street. It's a 1920s craftsman that needs work, but Bill Owens has been teaching me basic home repair skills, and Dr. Rodriguez has been helping me plant a garden for the backyard. My sister visited last month, her first trip to Cedar Falls since my disappearance. She admitted she had been worried about my mental state, wondering if I was having some kind of breakdown. By the end of her week-long stay, during which she experienced the slower pace and genuine connections that define life here, she confessed to being envious. "You seem so settled," she observed on her last evening as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. Not just geographically, but emotionally. Like you finally figured out who you're supposed to be. She wasn't wrong. The woman who stands in Murphy's Diner today, greeting customers by name and remembering their usual orders, is someone I wouldn't have recognized a year ago. She's stronger, more confident, more connected to her own desires and values. She's also happier in ways that have nothing to do with external circumstances and everything to do with internal alignment. Derek has remarried, according to a mutual friend who felt compelled to share the news. His new wife is younger, more traditionally beautiful, and apparently more willing to sublimate her own ambitions to support his career. I felt no jealousy when I heard this news, only sadness for a woman who might someday find herself abandoned in a small town, wondering how her life became so small. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Derek had never driven away that day. Would I have eventually found the courage to leave our marriage on my own? Would I have discovered this strength and independence through some other catalyst? Would I have remained trapped in a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt suffocating from within? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and I'm grateful not to need them. Sometimes the cruelest actions yield the most unexpected gifts. Derek thought he was teaching me a lesson about dependence when he abandoned me in Cedar Falls. Instead, he accidentally gave me the greatest gift possible: the opportunity to discover who I really was when stripped of everything I thought defined me. Today, as I prepare to lock up the diner and walk home to my imperfect but beloved house, I feel nothing but gratitude for the journey that brought me here. I was abandoned by someone who claimed to love me, only to be embraced by a community of people who barely knew me but chose to care anyway. The woman Derek left behind on Main Street was broken, frightened, and dependent. The woman writing these words is whole, confident, and free. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover you had everything you needed all along. You just had to be brave enough to use it. Cedar Falls, Montana, population 1247, plus one very grateful refugee from a life that never fit, has become more than my home. It has become the place where I learned that being abandoned can sometimes be the first step toward finding yourself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing.